Alright, 62780, 610, which is 62780 is contaminated site cleanup criteria. 610. Freight transportation model. Any freight transportation model used to support the evaluation pursuant to the provision 62, 780, 650, 62, 780, 680, and 62, 680, 690 shall freight the transport mode with the ability to adequately simulate the movement of degradation, contamination, aquifer over time, distant taking, and account attention mechanism, including biological, physical, chemical process models, shall improve the site conditions, shall be selected with the from ASTM documentation reference subsection 62, 780, 104. Florida Administration going for the list of the approved freight and transportation model maintained by the Department of Commerce, which is available upon request. The freight and transportation models not listed in the American Society of Technical Material Testing Materials Documentation References subsection 62, 780, 104. Florida Administration goes on the list of the approved freight transport modes maintained with the Department may be submitted with the Department of Approval for the inclusion of a list of approved freight transportation models maintained with the Department. Any of the such requests for Department approval shall set forth the minimum following information. Freight and transport model type, the name of the address developed, the freight and transport model description, a list of input parameters, 5, the applicable boundary conditions, and limitation of the appropriate fee used on the freight and transport model, the description of the method available for freight and transportation model, collaboration, example of the collaboration for the model and the measured site. Data 7. Documentation code site that has been done. For example, the hand calculation demonstrated the model formulas were programmed correctly. At least one independent reference knowledgeable for the area and experience in the use of the freight and transportation where the made must professional engineer register pursuant to Chapter 471. Professional geologists require registration pursuant to Chapter 492. Any approval denial of freight and transportation transport model received from the other state from any other federal agency is statistical methods. Any statistical method used in supporting evaluation pursuant to the provisions of paragraph 62, 780, 681B and 1, 62, 780, 682B 1, 62, 780, 683B 1 shall be statistically method appropriate based on the statistical property site specific data and set with the number of the states and the distribution of data and the percent of the non-detected sample. The result of the statistical method shall appropriate for the site condition shall be selected for the list approved with the statistical methods maintained by the Department of the copy, which is available upon request. Statistical method of not listing and approval of statistical methods maintained by the Department may be submitted with the Department of Approval for inclusion a list of approved statistical methods maintained by the Department. Any such with request of the Department of Approval sale set forth the minimum of the following information. Statistical method type, the name of the address of the developer, the statistical method description, a list of input parameters, list of limitation of the appropriate use of the statistical method, a list of assumption underlying the construction of statistical method, methodology using the validated assumption. 7. Documentation code testing that has been done. For example, the calculation demonstrates the statistical method of formulas for program correctly. At least one independent reference knowledge for the theory proposed statistical method training in the theory. For example, experience used for the statistical method when used may have the advanced degrees of statistical mathematics. Documentation proposed in the statistical method of readily available and used with the heavy published professional journals are reviewed. And statistical textbooks, any approval of denials of statistical methods received for the other state from a federal agency within 60 days of the receipt of the request of the approval of freight and transport model of within 100 days of the request. Approval of the new statistical method, the Department shall issue an order to provide the requester of the approval of the freight and transport model of the statistical method and notify the request of the reason why the request does not adequately demonstrate the requirements of subsection 62780, 610, and 62780, 610.2. As applicable have been met. The freight and transport model statistical methods submitted and completely respect and sufficient to satisfy the objectives of subsection 62780, 610, 1 and 2. As applicable, the documentation is informed the requester pursuant to paragraph 62, 780, 610.3b. And if the requester submit the Department shall arise a request of the address deficiency 6080 after the receipt of the notification, the deficiency if not timely corrected cannot be corrected in favor of the transport model statistical method submitted with approval. The Department shall be used. The Department order shall be agency action removal relievable pursuant to section 125.96 and 125.7. Rulemaking Authority 376.303, 376.3071, 376.307001, 376.3078, 4, 376.81, 403.0877, Florida laws implemented 376-307-3071, 376-307-01, 376-307-84, 376-81-4030-877. Florida State History News, April 17, 2005. Amended June 12, 2013. Alright, 62780-650. Risk assessment. If the person responsible for site rehabilitation elects to perform a risk assessment during the risk assessment process, the person responsible for the site rehabilitation encourages to have the direct discussion with the department head various decisions to establish the applicable exposure of relevant receptors, risk of the management options based on a current project of landed use at the site of the risk assessment performed with the following risk assessment task elements which will be performed applicable. An exposure assessment identifying the pathways, routes, and the human environmental receptors may be exposed to the contaminated, determine the level of the contamination with the human environmental receptors may be exposed to the exposure assessment shall identify the actual potential exposure of the pathway and routes, identify the actual potential human environmental receptors for each of the exposure pathways, sensitive subpopulations, determine expected concentration, contamination, actual potential human environmental receptors may be exposed with the most recent sampling representative monitoring well have then occurred with no more than 270 days prior to the risk assessment report submittal. Determine the exposure factors, exposures of duration, exposure frequency by the way of the ingestion, and based on the site-specific characteristics, including consideration, current plausibility, project land use, institutional engineering controls may be proposed in order to ensure that the exposure factors do not exchange non-site-specific exposures contained in the U.S. Environmental Protection and Exposure Factors Handbook 2011. In addition, hereby adopted and incorporated the reference to the Florida Rules Gateway reference number 03403 for information and exposure factors applicable to Florida exposure scenario. Estimated contamination dose received with the relevance receptor toxic assessment determines the human health environmental criteria for the contaminants found in the site. 1. The criteria to take into consideration acute chronic health effects associated with the short-term, long-term exposure shall be applicable to exposure pathways, routes identified with exposure assessment, including the applicability, potable water exposure, ingestion, dermal contact, and inhalation vapors and mist, non-potable water exposure to dermal contact, inhalation vapors, mist, and ingestion food scraps, and irrigated with such a water load on watering or other related exposure, pet and livestock for investigation. Soil exposure, ingestion, dermal contact, inhalation, ingestion, humans and animals, food, crops grown in the contaminated soil, non-potable surface water, exposure, ingestion, dermal contact, inhalation, vapors, and mist, the adverse effects of freshwater marine biota, including bioaccumulative effects in the food chain, humans, for example, through incidental ingest, dermal contact with the use of the result of the recreational purpose for the fish consumption shall be considered. Input assumptions different from those used to develop the control cleanup target level may be used in proper purpose. The cleanup target levels appropriate equations from Chapter 62777. Florida Administration Codes may use to calculate alternative cleanup target levels. Tax values for the quantifying human health risk. Developing an alternative cleanup target level may be taken from the following information source listed in 62780-100 in order to preference. Tier 1 in order of preference, Environmental Protection Agency Integrated Risk Information System Database, Professional Peer-Reviewed Toxic Values, PPR-TV, Derived Environmental Protection Agency, Super Technical Support Center for the U.S. Environmental Protection Fund, Superfund. By Terrier 2, the toxic value is available to more than one source of the Terrier. The value may be based on one or most recent reviews. The toxicological literature accompanying the dose of the response analysis should be the selected agency. The Toxic Substance Disease Registry minimal risk level, tolerable upper intake levels issued by the Institute of Medicine, National Academy of Science. U.S. Environmental 3, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Health Effects Assessment Summary Table, Human Health Benchmarks, Pesticide, Other Toxicity. The value of the technical documents available to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Pesticide Programs, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Water and Drinking Water Regulations, Health Advisory Levels, Terrier 3, the toxic value available from more than one source of the Terrier value based on the most recent review of the toxicological literature accompanying the dose response analysis selected. All right, one, California Environmental Protection Agency Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, Chronic Reference Exposure Levels, Cancer Potential Agencies, World Health Organization, Tolerable Daily Intake, the Internal Toxicity Estimate, for values withdrawn IRIS database. 5. Values from the source either selected by the Florida Department and Protection proposed by the person responsible for site rehabilitation, except for the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, that is statutory and risk requirements. The risk characterization utilized the result of the exposure assessment and the toxicity assessment of the relevant public health and epidemiologically assessment categorized the cumulative risk effective pollution of the environmental form of the contamination found with the site based on concentration contamination found at the site. Characterization should include the risk of the human health, safety of the exposure contamination, risk of contamination non-human species ecosystems. Derivation appointed with the alternative cleaning target is applicable to reference in Appendix C of the technical report reference in subsection 62.780.100C 102 the Florida Administration Code for the guidance derivation of the alternative clean target levels for TRPHs based on the subclassification method in Chapter 62.777 Table 3. For the methods may be used to determine soil properties for the derivation cleaning alternative cleaning target based on site-specific characteristics. If the soil presents the use by the derived and the alternative cleanup target levels and developing alternative cleanup target levels of scientific data are available with potential and additive synergistic antagonistic interactions among the contaminants. Potential exposure contamination via the multiple pathways shall be considered based on the target organ and effective mechanism, toxicity, empirical observation, clinical or laboratory study. The default assumption shall be based on non-carcinogenic chemicals affecting some of the same target organ systems having additive effects that carcinogenic risk regardless of the target organ and additive. However, the no default target organ system effects may be justified through detailed toxicological analysis of the contamination present with a specific site. The justification and proportion of alternative cleanup target levels applicable to groundwater soil. The justification alternative cleanup target level should be based upon site-specific data, the modeling risk, the risk assessment, risk reduction, technical combination thereof, the establishing alternative cleanup target level, groundwater soil. Following factors shall be used applicable to calculations for the lifetime excess cancer level risk of the 1.0E6, the hazard index of 1 for the groundwater only, nuisance, organoleptic, or aesthetic consideration. However, the department shall not require the site rehabilitation to achieve the cleanup target level for the individual contamination that is more stringent on the site-specific background concentration for the contamination of the best achievable detection limit for the contamination. The justification shall be based on statewide applicable site-specific characteristics pertaining to the site, including the presence and projection of the effect of the aquifers adjacent to the surface water, the particular consideration probability of the contamination substantially affecting will mitigate and substantially affect the known public and private source of potable water. All right, B, the technical feasibility of achieving the soil, water, and quality criteria based on the review of available technology, site, soil characteristics, the result of the exposure and assessment, and toxicity assessment, risk characterization pursuant to 62.780.651, the 62.780.651B, 62.780.651C. The fate and transportation model of contamination may be employed pursuant to 62.780.610, but the Florida Administration Code to document the human health environmental risk of applicable documentation potential risk associated with the establishment of the alternative cleanup target levels or acceptable fate and transportation module. The contamination use of the module validated during the subsequent monitoring justified no further action proposal during the natural attrition monitoring, the activity remediation monitoring. Adjust and appropriated with using empirical data with the data obtained. Probabilistic risk assessment must be employed with the document human health and environmental risk are acceptable to document the potential risk associated with the establishment. Alternative cleanup target levels are acceptable provided the equations of the 62.77 and figure 1 through 10 as applicable shall be used as the basis for the calculation of cumulative risk of the calculation of alternative cleanup levels. The selection of the alternative cleanup target level shall be the value present in 90% percentile with the final exposure for the risk distribution proposed module equivalent to 10% of the cleanup target level mid distribution. Following information regarding the probabilistic risk assessment model submitted and approved by the department pursuant to subsection 62.780.610 Florida 2 Administration Codes All information required for the paragraph 62786-2B with the Florida Administration Code, the type of installation used, for the simulation used, and the open source of the model, the proprietary model, priority model, the source of the distribution used of the model, the information describing the applicability limitations, distribution used in the model, the assumption made regarding the shape of the distribution used in the model based on the assumption, any of the default criteria, prior parameters, values placed, and other values proposed in the probabilistic risk assessment rational for the such replacement, especially including the change of the mode with all algorithms and sample from the distribution. Person responsible site rehabilitation may submit information listed in paragraph 62, 780, 653C. Preliminary registration go above the removal and approval of the advance submitted with the modular result. A discussion unnecessarily associated with the model input with the probabilistic risk assessment, including contribution from the nature, source, exposure, toxicity, information, shape, and input distribution limits showing as the point of values, inputs of any of the used analysis, the selection of specific modules used analysis for within the time frame specified in Table A located in the end of the Rule 62, 780, 900 Florida Administration Code, cleanup agreement documentation, the person responsible for site rehabilitation, submit the department for the review electronic paper, a copy of the risk assessment report. The risk assessment report shall contain a description of the task element undertaken, summarize the conclusion obtained, but include the tables and pursuant to these paragraphs. So paragraph 62, 780, 8A, 26, to be updated applicable on included seals. Scale of the site map of the contaminant medium and illustrate the degree extent of the contamination, groundwater flow, the direction, including one of the following. A new further action plan with the institutional engineering controls shall be included with the site meets the applicable. No further action criteria subsection controls may be included with the site meets the applicable non-further action criteria subsection 62, 780, 680. Florida Administration Code, no further action proposal with or without institutional controls. Both institutional engineering controls may include the site meets the applicable. No further action criteria subsection 62, 780, 683. Florida Administration Codes. A natural tuition monitoring plan may be included with the site meets the natural tuition monitoring criteria Rule 62, 780, 690. A recommendation prior to the remedial action plan pursuant to Rule 62, 780, 700 shall include, but unless the recommendation paragraph 62, 780, 654A, 62, 780, 654B is included, the department shall provide the person responsible for site rehabilitation with the written approval of the risk assessment report. If there are no further action proposal approved with the site rehabilitation completion order for reference in 62, 780, 687 to the natural tuition monitoring plan is approved with the natural tuition monitoring plan as attention as referenced in paragraph 62, 780, 690, 5A. If recommended with the prepare of the remedial action plan is approved with written notification, remedial action plan shall be prepared pursuant to Rule 62, 780, 700 Florida Administration Code. Notify the person responsible in site rehabilitation writing statement stating the reason for the risk assessment does not contain information adequate to support the proposed alternative cleaning target levels. The reason with the proposed plan and recommendation submitted with the paragraph 62, 780, 653 is not supported by the applicable criteria. 7. If the risk assessment report dating is incomplete with respect to the insufficient satisfy the objectives set forth in subsection 62, 780, 650 Florida Administration Code, the department shall inform the person responsible in site rehabilitation pursuant to 62, 780, 650, 6B Florida Administration Code based on the rejection determination of efficiency within exceeding the text and scientific basis with any subject. The person in site responsible shall submit the department for the review electronic paper the risk assessment report and then address the deficiencies within 60 days after the notice. Rulemaking Authority 376-303, 376-3071, 376-30701, 376-30784, 376-81, 403-061, Florida Law Implemented 376-3071, 376-30701, 376-30784, 376-81, 403-21, 403-061, 403-062. Florida State History News, April 17, 2005, amended June 12, 2013, February 2014. Alright. 7 and 11. 11 pages to read. I'm going to take a break.